What a super great way to start off 24 hours of inspiring talks. Thank you. Now, don't go anywhere, Cal, because you're
Nope.
going to do your job as a journalist by interviewing one of the most famous authors in my life, Catherine Ryan Hyde. She is the author of 40 published books, including Pay It Forward, which has been translated into 20 languages. It has also inspired the movie that was out in 2000 and has changed people's lives all around the world, including mine. Now, my understanding is that Catherine came up with this idea for her book when her car caught fire in what she described as the bad neighborhood in which she lived. And two total strangers came to her assistance, then left before she could even thank them. One more thing. When I contacted Catherine to speak, she wrote back and said that she normally never accepts these kinds of invitations because she's usually writing several books at one time. But she is here with us today. Catherine, thank you so much for saying yes. Okay, let's put Cal and Catherine together and listen in on their conversation. Cal and Catherine, the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you, Nathan. Yeah, I looked at what you were doing. You sent me something, let me look at what you had planned here. And I remember I wrote you back and said, darn it, I'm just gonna have to make an exception, aren't I? And here I am.
Catherine, how do you write all those books with a broken arm?
Oh, it's just one little bone in my hand. Let's not make it out to be worse. You know, it's funny because people keep saying, "Oh, can you type? Can you type?"
Can you
And
show everyone?
I have to make a really a very embarrassing confession, which is that I am not a proper touch typist. I am the world's fastest one-finger typist. It's a terrible thing to have to admit. And I put out 2 books a year that way. Well, yeah, I use one hand for the shift key. No, that's one more hand that's one more finger that I'm using. I know. What can I tell you? It is what it is. I type very fast for a person who's not doing proper touch typing. And I'm still managing to do 2 books a year somehow.
So your second finger just over and again around the keyboard.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much, I'm making it work. What can I tell you? I've been making it work for, I don't know, 20 some years now. Or more.
If we were looking at you in a movie when you were 19 years old, what would we see?
Oh, you wouldn't have liked what you saw when I was 19 years old. I was pretty lost. I was, you know, the nice thing about being a writer is everything you go through in your life becomes fodder. But when I was 19, well, when I was about 14, when I was in high school, I had a teacher who inspired me to believe that I could write. But I didn't go right off and start doing it, probably because it's a very courageous thing to do. It's a little bit like jumping off a cliff without a parachute. They don't issue paychecks really to writers. So to say that you're going to, I mean, eventually they might, 10 years down the road, you might get a paycheck. But so I didn't really have the courage to set out that way. And I was a little bit on the at-risk side as a youth. And so when I was 19, I was pretty drowning in drugs and alcohol and spinning around and going absolutely nowhere. I am pleased to say that that it's been 31 years since I've had a sip of alcohol or anything stronger than an ibuprofen. And about 2 years after I got that problem cleaned up, I started getting serious about writing a book and finishing it. So there's no doubt about the fact that I had to get my head on straight first. But that's what you would have seen when I was 19. You would have seen somebody who was very lost and drowning and struggling. But then when all was said and done, that's something that I now get to use in my work.
Wow. And you know
It's
what?
knowing how it feels to be down there and have to pull yourself up.
this brings up the central question that I wanted to ask you about. And
Okay.
that is, do we need difficulty to find the best in ourselves?
It seems that we do. I don't want to wish difficulty on people. I know that as an author, people ask me sometimes about writing a sequel. People will like a book and they'll say, why don't you write a sequel to that book? And I'll give them an answer that I think they find kind of surprising. The answer is, I don't want to have to torture those poor characters again. To get a kind of a story where a character grows and blossoms and has this epiphany and changes, and it's a pivotal moment in their life, you have to put them through some very difficult times. And I think that the same is true for us. I'm not advocating for hard times, but it does seem to me, when people talk to me about why I chose the ending that I did for Pay It Forward, what I say is that where I come from in my observations, the whole world doesn't change. We don't make giant, sweeping, earth-shattering changes when the status quo is just clicking along just fine. To me, we make changes like that when the roof falls in.
Well, let's trace this back, because I would love to see the moment. I know about the story, but I would like you to describe the story of how Pay It Forward came to be, and then sort of trace that process of creativity to show how this difficult moment bloomed right in front of all of us.
To me, that's actually the more interesting part of the story. Nathan set it up kind of briefly, that I was in some very serious trouble. I was in a bad neighborhood. I was alone. It was late at night. The engine of my car was on fire. This was before cell phones. I had to get out of the car because it was filling up with smoke. I didn't really want to get out of the car in a bad neighborhood late at night. And then, to make a long story short, I didn't get to thank these gentlemen, because in the process of,
let's not make a long story short. Let's make a long story.
All right, let's make a long story long. Fine. Okay, so they pulled their car over and jumped out, and I'm thinking I'm going to die because these men are running in my direction. Obviously, I'm out there by myself, and they're like coming at me. And one of them had a blanket that I guess they had taken out of their backseat or out of their trunk, which also did not comfort me. And
so you're about to be kidnapped.
Yes. Actually, I was thinking, people think this is a joke, but the first thought in my head was I never made a will. And then the second thought was I have nothing to give to anybody anyway, except the car, which is currently on fire. That's what I was thinking. It was actually worse than kidnapping. What happened was one of them went around me, went into my car. The door was hanging open, popped the hood from the inside. The guy with the blanket leaned his upper body into my flaming engine compartment and smothered the flames by hand with this blanket. And sometime around the time they got it put out, the fire department showed up, which is also kind of interesting because it means somebody else was trying to help me too. Because like I say, we didn't have cell phones back then. So apparently somebody had gone behind us on the freeway and seen the trouble I was in and stopped and called it in for me. So I actually had two Good Samaritans that night. But the Good Samaritan who really fascinates me is the one who took his bare hands and put out my fire. It's a lot to do for a stranger. And so, okay, so the fire department showed up and they kind of showed us, how it started, which is not a particularly interesting story. And then they told me what would happen if it hadn't been put out, which is a little more interesting because, as I said, disasters are always very interesting.
So the car
at that point, I was basically driving a Molotov cocktail. That's a short version, because the fire was burning along the throttle line. And so if I'd been standing beside the car when it made its way back to the gas tank, well, you know where I'm going with that. I don't know if I'd still be here or not, but that's a big deal. So I turned around to thank these men when I realized how huge this was, what they had done. They weren't back there. I looked for their car had driven away. In the process of my talking to the fire department, they packed up and left without particularly expecting any gratitude from me. This is LA. LA is a big town, and I immediately knew that I was never going to see them again. So to me, this is where the story gets more interesting. So because they were there as fast as they were, I was able to get the car put back together. It cost a little for some burned parts, but it was not destroyed, which is good because I couldn't have afforded a new car to save my life at that moment. And I went back to driving it. But here's what was different. Now I'm driving down the freeway and I got one eye on the shoulder of the road and I'm looking for somebody in trouble. Because when I see them, now I want to be the person who stops for them. I never did that before. Not out of any meanness. I didn't think it would. I mean, I would drive by somebody and I would think, oh, buddy, hope your day gets better, But it wasn't my thing. All of a sudden, it was my thing. I am the person who will stop and do that for them. And this is when the sort of train of thought started moving. Had another weird little experience that I don't recount nearly as much, where I was talking to an acquaintance. This was a couple of years after this had happened, who kind of surprised and dismayed me by describing a story in which he had stolen something from someone. He'd taken something off their car. And it's very hard to know what to say to a thing like that. So what I said was, not wanting to be like super judgmental and get nothing but defensiveness back. So what I said was, did you think about the person who you stole from? Did you kind of like imagine in your head they get back and how that feels to them to find out that this was gone? Well, he did get very defensive, but what he said was very interesting. He said, well, I've been stolen from. That's what's happened to me. I think that was the moment when it came together in my head that, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. All of a sudden it struck me that we are all going around doing unto others as we have been done to. It's not the beginning of the game. By the time we get old enough to do unto anybody, we have been done to plenty. And that is normally not the good news. Now, what I wanted to know is, could that be the good news? Because I had this experience of somebody just coming into my life with this astonishing kindness that I never expected. Can that be the good news? Can somebody be used to being lied to and cheated and be putting the same thing out into the world and have an experience like this turn their thinking around? And then, of course, I had to start thinking, well, what would be a fictional scenario in which that potentially could happen and enough people could hear about it? What I like about a conference about like this is the whole concept is how could you get enough people to hear about it? And this was basically back before the internet, is essentially. I mean, I wrote the book in like the mid 90s, so the internet didn't come hugely into play.
So the idea that if you just paid it forward, if you set in motion a series of good deeds, you would just be reaping more good deeds.
Yes.
And what was the response to the book and the movie when people saw that? I didn't quite catch that. Oh. Could you?
Well, it depends. I mean, Time Magazine. I mean, some people were cynical. If a person was cynical opening the book, they were cynical still closing the book. I can't literally turn somebody into an optimist. Time Magazine called it an idealistic Ponzi scheme, which is interesting because when I read that, I thought, yes, that's exactly what I'm going for. It's an idealistic Ponzi scheme. It's like a multi-level marketing scheme, but turned upside down so that the person who starts it gets nothing and the benefit is sent out to the multitudes. That's exactly what I was going for. Well, okay, but an answer to your question, what were individual people's reactions? I was thinking of this during your talk because it was very similar to what you were saying about how we learn not to ask questions. I initially wrote this book about a 12-year-old. I chose a 12-year-old boy to change the world through kindness because I thought it was something that a 12-year-old kid could do that grown-ups couldn't. Because I thought that by the time we got to this age, we were just so used to the way the world was, and just so, like, I could picture a grown-up sitting down and making a list of all the reasons it would never work and just talking themselves out of even starting. Whereas I pictured the kid with like that optimism, like, no, it can be better. I'll show you it can be better. What I discovered in the aftermath of the book is I found out that all these adults had that same little optimistic 12-year-old in there, just looking for an opportunity to wake up again. I was wrong in thinking that our optimism had been somehow stomped out of us or trained out of us. It was exactly what you said. It was like for a while we would say these wildly optimistic things, and then we reach a certain age where we're very aware of peer pressure, and we look around and like the people around us aren't saying these wildly optimistic things. And we don't want to appear stupid. And so after a while, we just kind of put a lid on that. We just kind of go, well, that doesn't seem to be the kind of things people are saying. So I kind of thought, well, you know what? If somebody is going to jump up and risk appearing stupid, I volunteer. Like I'll be the person that Time Magazine picks on for writing too optimistic a book. I totally volunteer to do that. But I noticed that, like, there was a woman, the very first book signing I ever did, this woman came up to me and she brought me this little gift. It was this little silver box, heart-shaped box. And she said, I will, which is, this didn't make it into the movie, but that's like a line of commitment from the final scene of the book. And I thought, holy cow, it works. People are like actually saying, yes, I will commit to doing this, which I had not anticipated. So that was when I realized that I had severely underestimated adults.
How can all of the people, the young people watching you right now, keep their optimism as they move forward?
I am a strong supporter of just putting out into the world what you wish the world would be. That is not an original thought. I am not the one who came up with the phrase, be the change that you want to see in the world. But, you know, people get into all these discussions about can kindness change the world? And I'm guessing that's what probably some young people are thinking. Yes, but will that really change the world? Yes, I absolutely guarantee you that if you go out and perform an act of kindness, you have just changed the world by one act of kindness. If we can just let go of this idea that we have to change the world utterly, leaving nothing unchanged, we become so daunted through that. If a person just decides to wake up tomorrow morning and just be a little kinder than they were the day before, to go a little farther, you know, in service of someone else than they normally would, I guarantee you their optimism will rise. As a matter of fact, not only have they done studies in the fact that when people give an act of kindness, it improves their brain chemistry, it makes them happier, it makes them more optimistic and more likely to be kind in the future. Not only when a person receives it, but even a person who witnesses it goes through an actual change in brain chemistry where they feel more positive. Just witnessing an act of kindness. So if you want to witness an act of kindness, I strongly suggest you go out and create one, because that just guarantees that you'll be there. that I guarantee if you perform an act of kindness, you'll be there to get the benefit of that act of kindness. And people are often very surprised how much it can change their whole outlook.
You know, I didn't even realize it when I came into this conversation, but it is a direct overlap. I was able to keep my childhood curiosity because, in a sense, I kept paying it forward. I never stopped asking the question, even if it might have seemed dumb or something that was going to upset somebody, because they were authentic questions and I didn't mean to hurt anybody. And so they were kind of treated kindly. And because I never held back, I kept doing more. And so maybe that's the same path for optimism.
I refuse to give up my childhood optimism, probably because my father was a pessimist. And my mom and I would come up with these wonderful ideas of all these things that we were going to do. And he would go through and tell us all the things we hadn't thought of that could go wrong. And so for me to insist on retaining my optimism was sort of, that was like my childhood rebellion. It was like, I'm sorry, I am going to be optimistic. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm also a very realistic person. I mean, I think people read the book and they think that I'm just like this wildly, almost unrealistically optimistic person. Not at all. Not at all. I see everything that's around me. I see the good that's around me. I see the bad that's around me. I still believe that people are basically good, or at least want to be, intend to be. There are a lot of factors involved on how they may be acting out. If nothing else, I believe that we come into this world meaning well. So I just, I see the world as being very much a two-sided coin. There's a lot that's very bad. There's a lot that's very good. So now my question is, where am I going to put the bulk of my attention today? What am I going to, which one of those am I going to fill my head with so that that becomes what my world looks like?
Do you think that the coronavirus has shifted the way we're thinking, that it's made us step back from doing good things because we can be endangering ourselves?
No, I don't think so. I think it definitely has made us step back. I also think that it has made us appreciate being around each other, which was something we took for granted. I think that it's caused us to no longer take for granted social interactions, which is awfully easy to do. I think that it has brought up a certain amount of spirit of wanting to solve this as a group. I mean, I think people really want to survive. They want other people to survive. They want to be there for other people. I think maybe we don't see it as much because we're kind of in our little separate areas. I think it's a very challenging thing that's going on. I'm sorry, I still believe people are basically good.
Do you think great things are going to come out of this the same way when the smoke was filling up your car?
I very much hope so. I am of the belief that things come up to be healed, both in our individual lives and in our collective lives. That when something comes up and presents itself as being a huge problem or disaster, it's something that has been there and now needs to come out into the light and find a solution. I hope that means that something good will come out of all this. I know there have been a lot of times in our history when we have walked very close to the edge of a cliff. Generally speaking, I find that when people force themselves to the edge of a cliff, they look down and think, no, I don't really think I want to go down there. And so at that point, a course correction is obviously in order. So again, I don't want to sound like a wild cockeyed optimist, but I think we will learn a lot about ourselves through this. And I think that anytime, one of the things that I find really affecting from my own experience, And we're having this a lot because, you know, California's on fire. We're having a lot of natural disasters in addition to, that's why my eyes are a little burny because I have smoke where we are. So, you know, in addition to the illness and whatever that we're seeing, and I was absolutely going somewhere with that. And I distracted myself with the thing about the eyes. I'm sorry,
Well,
ask me a question and I swear it will come right back to me.
and actually, this kind of wraps up the entire issue. And it really is when your eyes are like that, and when you're waking up and seeing the sky, not blue, but orange. Can you see something positive in that because you're just pushed to want to make it blue?
I remember what it was I was going to say. I've had a very affecting experience with just watching people on the news in major disasters. Like you see a hurricane and there's a guy standing in front of what used to be his house and now it's just a chimney. And it seems to me in almost every case, you hold a microphone out to that man and he says something along the lines of, I'm so lucky because my family is all okay. And what that says to me is when things are kind of rolling along and it's pretty status quo, we tend to worry about very small things. You know, I really deserve that promotion and it just, my dog is misbehaving and just, you know, and when the roof falls in, all of a sudden we come back to what really matters. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're headed for, is a lesson in what really matters.
That's a great way to wrap this up, although I wish we can be talking for another 2 hours.
It's amazing that was the whole time segment. It absolutely flew. Absolutely flew.
Thank you so much. I'm more optimistic. I'm more optimistic as we leave, and I hope that everybody else is too.
And we're just getting started. I mean, the conference is just getting started.
I hope this isn't the last time that we're going to talk. Thank you so much.
That was nice. Yeah, thank you.